Hello, welcome back to That'll Do Garage. Thanks for joining me. Today we're going to be working on a 2010 Ford Focus. We got a couple of problems. We got a brake pulsation, we got wheel bearing growling noise, and we need an oil change. So let's get started. So the concerns are, high-speed braking, 70 to 50 or whatever, you get a pretty aggressive kind of bum, 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 in the brake pedal and in the steering wheel. So then that usually generally means it's the front rotors. They get a little warp to them, and that causes the pulsation. So I got some new rotors right over there. New pads, since we're going to be there, may or may not need those. But the main reason we're here is this is my son's car, and he's leaving for college in a couple weeks. So I got to kind of do everything I can to get it good to go. And he does have a nasty growling, low frequency noise, I guess, coming from the front end. Doesn't seem to change as you shift the steering wheel back and forth. So either both of the front wheel bearings are doing it, or I don't know, but that's where we're at. We're going to do both front wheel bearings today. And you don't have to do that, but they both have the same mileage, right? They both have the same conditions. So we're going to go ahead and change that out. I did get parts over here. Brake parts, as I said, oil change parts. This is the hub and bearing assembly. So there are two different parts that I should show you. This is actually the bearing, and this gets pressed into the knuckle. And this is the hub. This is actually where the wheel mounts, and this presses into the bearing. And I did say press, which means it doesn't just bolt in. You can't just take a couple of bolts out and all this will come apart. It's a press fit, so it's a super, super tight fit, which brings up this tool here. This is a little baby shop press I bought from, I got it from Harbor Freight. Less than 200 bucks. This is just a 12-ton. All this does is produce a lot of force in a very controlled way. So this thing will push really hard straight down. And I can use that to press the bearing out of the knuckle and the hub into the bearing and so on. You just have to putz with the right adapters, and sometimes I got to go get like 2x4s and cut grooves in them to fit around the such and such, and then everything's perfect. But if you don't want to do a shop press, another way to do this is they make tool kits where you can do all of this on the car. So you kind of set up a C-clamp with the right adapters, and it supports it on the back and pushes on the front, or vice versa. And then you don't need one of those. But this is a bit more generic. You can use that for lots of different cars, lots of different applications, whereas the wheel bearing press tool is really just for that. So I've gone that route. It's a little bit more generic and universal. Okay, here we are. Brakes look okay. We have sufficient brake pad depth here. But I'm still going to replace them because I definitely want to replace the rotors because of the pulsation. And I've heard that you're not supposed to do just the rotor without also changing the pads. So we'll go ahead and do pads as well. They're not too expensive. The plan here, as I said earlier, disconnect the brakes. Wheel bearing and hub is in here, so we're going to pull the brakes off, pull the rotor off. Then we're going to take this nut off to free up this CV shaft, or axle shaft. We're going to have to disassemble, this is the knuckle piece here. So we're going to pull the tie rod end off. We're going to pull this pinch bolt out, and the pinch bolt down at the bottom of the lower ball joint. And we'll have to disconnect our ABS sensor too, up here. And that way we can take this whole knuckle off and bring it over to the press, and then do our magic over there. Okay, brakes disassembled. Next thing I'm going to do, with the ABS sensor, there's usually two ways to do it. The first one is you can take the screw out and pull the sensor out of the knuckle. The other way is disconnect it up at a connector like this, and then, you know, pull the whole thing off of the brackets. The pros and cons here: this relationship between the ABS sensor and the tone ring inside the hub is really precise. So if you go to take this out and you bend the connector, or you get some rust underneath there and you don't get it back in just the right place, it can mess up the relationship between those two, and then the ABS light will come on. You know, there's a risk there. The other way is less risky regarding this, but now you have this 18 inches of cable hanging off, and last time I did this, I left the sensor in place and I disconnected up there. And I just don't like having that cable in the way. It gets caught on the hoist, or I mean the press, and it's always flopping around. So I'm gonna try taking it off here, and we'll just see how that goes. Sometimes the head of this bolt might strip out or something, so we're just gonna be careful. But so next steps are ABS sensor, tie rod end, CV shaft nut. This is 32 millimeters, I think. I have an 1.25 inch socket, which is close enough. Let's see what else. Oh yeah, the pinch bolt on the lower ball joint down here. This is a heat shield to protect the ball joint from the heat of the brakes. And then we have a pinch point right here for the top of the knuckle. So we'll start working on those. I'm gonna put a little penetrating oil on there just to kind of, you can see how like rusty the threads are and stuff. It doesn't hurt, and it could save you from stripping it out. Okay, so I got the tie rod end nut off, I got the CV shaft nut off, and I'm working on the ABS sensor now. You can see the bolt is removed, and I just wanted to show you, if you just put a screwdriver under here and like pry up, it's gonna basically crack that plastic housing. So what I'm doing right now is I'm just kind of moving it back and forth left to right to try to free it up there. And that way, you know, the rotational force is going to break free the rust and the crud. So then when I do actually pull it up, it should come out more easily. I also found a channel locks works pretty good to just kind of wiggle things around and just don't break that plastic. So that should be okay then. We didn't break anything. We'll clean up the rusty hole and just slide it back in when we're done. Got the top pinch bolt out, the one from up here. This bottom one has a nut on this side. I think it's a T50. Torx on the other side. Let me just check. Yeah, T50. Let's just see if she'll come out of there. Not so much. So have to put my big breaker bar on it. But we are moving along, I think. After I get that pinch bolt out and I drive the CV shaft in, should be able to wrestle the knuckle right off of there. Okay, so some progress here. The way these pinch bolt joints work is it's got a seam right in there in the middle, and I like to take those apart by taking the bolt out and then driving a chisel into that seam. It just opens it up just ever so slightly, and then what you do is you just pry down like this, and it'll pull that ball joint right out of there. So that works pretty well. Doesn't seem to damage anything. I'm gonna work on doing the same thing up here. I already took the pinch bolt out, and you can see there's a seam here where this flange from the strut goes in. So I'm gonna try to get my chisel in there, and yeah, we're getting darn close. Whew, I'm out of breath from pounding. Okay, so I got that one off. I took that pinch bolt off. I spread that just a tiny bit. And then I put the nut back on here. Put the CV shaft nut back on the CV shaft. And I left about 1/8 of an inch protruding of the nut. And then I smashed that with a hammer. And what that does is push the shaft back in, and that gets it freed up out of the hub. And then I just took this punch here and I drove it the rest of the way out. The thing we're trying to avoid is mushrooming the head on that CV shaft. You know, it would get hung up on all these splines in here and probably have to be replaced. So I think this thing is coming off. The knuckle is coming off the strut pretty easily. So as soon as I get this CV shaft out, I think the knuckle will be free, and I should be able to just take it over to the press. I had planned to take the hub out of the knuckle with the slide hammer. It just attaches right here. Maybe we can try that on the other side, but it's really not necessary given the fact that I'm going to use the press there. Okay, fell right off of there basically. So you can see the end of the strut here, nothing special. It's got that flange on the back to align it. Lower ball joint, CV shaft, tie rod end, everything is pretty under control there. This thing just dropped right off as soon as I pushed that CV shaft out. So this extra shiny part in the very middle here is actually the hub, and that's connected to this side. So this is all one piece from there to there. So the first thing that we're going to do is press that out, down. We're going to support the knuckle, press the hub out of the bearing. And then we're going to take this snap ring out here. See the snap ring? And the bearing will come out this way, so they'll kind of split like a sandwich. I don't know why I said like a sandwich, but the hub will go out the front and the bearing will come out the back. After many hours of struggle, I figured out that this press does not have enough power, or for whatever reason it's got too much flex or something, but it didn't have enough power to break the bearings loose. So I ended up pulling out my old ball joint press here, which is just a big clamp basically. You run the impact on here with the right adapters and everything, and she squeezes it together. So what I had to do is do this to break it loose, but then that runs out of travel. So then I put it back on the press to push it all the way through. It's been like probably 2 hours, maybe 3 hours of screwing around just with this. So maybe the tool that does it on the car is worth it, if you can rent it or something. Minor detail here, actually kind of major detail. This car is equipped with ABS in the front. Not all Focuses are equipped with ABS, but if you have one, you got to make sure you get the ABS version. And here's the thing, I think this is the original wheel bearing, I'm not sure, and obviously this is a replacement. If you can just barely see these graduated lines all the way around here, it's actually not like in the surface, it's based on the buildup of gunk and junk here. But what happens is that pattern all the way around, it's like a tiny magnet or a piece of magnetic metal that's, excuse me, very specifically and strategically imprinted around the circumference here. And the ABS sensor kind of lays like this, and it reads that, you know, very specific, very consistent graduated spacing. And that's how it knows the rotation of the wheel based on how many of those openings are going by. So I was trying to make sure that I put these in the right way, and I was looking for documentation, you know, like inside outside or something, and they definitely are not you know, universal. Like this doesn't seem to be that same material. So I went and looked on the manufacturer website, and it does refer to this side as the ABS encoder. This pattern is called the encoder, and then the sensor is on the car. So you need to make sure, if your car is equipped with ABS, that you figure out which side of the bearing the manufacturer put the encoder on, and then you press them in accordingly. I think we spent about probably 4 hours total just right here kneeling on the floor through a battle with the ball joint press, the chop press, and the sledgehammer. I was able to get everything stripped apart last night, and then I immediately went to bed because I was exhausted. So now we're going to clean up the inside here just a little bit with some emery cloth or sandpaper just to get the crud out of there. And then we're going to press in the new bearing. And it's important to support it in the right place. You need to think about where the friction is. When this thing is being pressed in, you know, the friction is going to be between this outer surface and the outer surface of the hub, or I'm sorry, the knuckle. So this is where all the pressure and the friction is going to be. So we're going to push right there. You don't want to push in here, because that's going to transfer the load across the bearing and it's going to damage the bearing. So push where the load is on this outer peak, and that's what all these stupid adapters are for, is to get that diameter just right. So we're going to press this in, we're going to put that snap ring back in, and then we're going to flip it over and we're going to press in the new hub assembly. And when we do that, we're going to support it right here, because then all, you know, this is in place. Now all the friction and all the load will be right here. So we'll set up some adapters for that. Not too shabby. You can see that snap ring groove on the inside there, so that tells you, you know, we're pretty much all the way down. And then when it was going down, it was pretty consistent, and then it really stopped, right? There was no more movement, the noise changed. So that's all the way down, and there's been no harm to the bearing. You can see right there, that's where the ABS sensor comes through. So this encoder is just about flush with that ABS sensor. So everything's making sense. I don't know if this is going to be a factor or not, but the hole for the ABS sensor is right there, and the snap ring kind of covers it about halfway. So I'm going to rotate the snap ring around to make sure that this gap lines up with that sensor so that it can come in without any interference. Moving back on toward reassembly on the car. We got our two completed knuckle assemblies here. Both of them ended up going okay. They look the same, which is a good sign too. It helps you kind of know that you have them assembled properly. I have the snap ring groove up where the ABS sensor will be coming through on both of them, and you can kind of see that everything's nice and free, so I don't anticipate any issues there. And now we're just going to put them back on the car, so that's pretty straightforward. Yeah, not too bad. All back together. Nice new nut on the CV shaft, new hub, new bearings on the inside. Tightened up the tie rod end, bolt and nut, pinch bolt up here, pinch bolt on the bottom ball joint, new pads and rotors. So now I'm just going to do a quick oil change, put the wheels back on, take it for a rip. Well, that's it. That definitely resolved it. Took care of that whirring, growling noise, which he said he never heard, but his music is so loud, I'm not surprised. And that's okay. It needed to be done. Had about 110,000 miles, so I don't know. It's kind of early for bearings, I guess, but not surprising. Anyway, that's it. Thanks for watching.